Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a better understanding and a deeper appreciation of the exciting world of chess. I am your host, George Merijanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club. This club meets every Wednesday evening in room C-188 of the McKay Campus School at Fitchburg State College. And with me is once again my trusty colleague and longtime co-host of Chess Chat, Martin Lane, one of the strongest and most active chess players in North Central Massachusetts. Welcome, Marty.
Hello, George. Good to see you again.
Well, Marty, today we're going to focus our attention on one of the greatest American chess players. In fact, this player is the greatest chess player who ever came out of Massachusetts. Born in Massachusetts, born in Somerville, Massachusetts. His name, Harry Nelson Pillsbury. And there's a reason why we are commemorating Harry Nelson Pillsbury, because here's a photo of Harry. He was born in 1872 in Somerville. He is buried in Reading, Massachusetts, at Laurel Hill Cemetery. In fact, his mother was from a very prominent family in Reading. But this month, there's going to be a nationally rated chess tournament at the Leominster Veterans Center at 100 West Street. It's the Sunday after Thanksgiving, November 29th, and the Massachusetts Chess Association is sponsoring a tournament hosted by the Veterans Center, and they've done a super job. This Veterans Center in Leominster, they've done massive renovations. It's beautiful. And this is the third straight year that the Massachusetts Chess Association has sponsored this at the Veterans Center. And we welcome chess players, people who have an interest in chess, to come by. If they want to come and watch, they can be spectators.
Right. No, we should tell them it's the Pillsbury Memorial Tournament.
It is the Harry Nelson Pillsbury Memorial.
Right. And yeah. We start in the morning. About what time?
We start
about 10 o'clock.
We will start about 10 o'clock, and it'll probably go until like 7. It's an all-day affair.
Right.
Probably until like 7:30. But people can drop it. You can drop it anytime. Watch some of the top players in the state, and some of them from New England.
And there's no admission to watch.
No, there's no admission fee. And actually, if some people want to play, they can actually go online to masschess.org, and there's all details as far as how they can. So again, we are going to have a major tournament. This is one of the premier chess tournaments in Massachusetts in Leominster, November 29th, a Sunday. And again, it's going to bring in the top players.
It also carries some Grand Prix points. Did you want to explain?
Well, yes, actually,
Grand players.
Well, the top players, they compete for points,
right.
Which is actually a race, a national. They compete against other players in the country for Grand Prix, what they call Grand Prix points.
Right.
Now, let's talk about Harry Nelson Pillsbury. You know, he actually made his claim to fame, in 1895, because in 1895, he was 22 years old, he sailed to Europe to play in this international tournament in Hastings, England, and to take on the strongest players of the world, and they were Europeans. You had Wilhelm Steinitz, who was the ex-world champion. You had Emanuel Lasker, who was the world champion. You had Mikhail Chigorin. Right. We've done shows on all these players. And Zygmunt Tarrasch. These Europeans laugh when they said, this American is coming over.
Well, yeah, we should remember that Europe was the center of culture at the time, and they kind of looked at the United States was not a superpower yet, and so they kind of looked down on the United States. They thought they were sort of backwoods. They didn't expect that the United States could produce a top-level chess player.
No, they scoffed at the idea that a young American who really had not made his mark in chess would come over and even have a chance. They had figured he would finish near the end.
I mean, a generation earlier there had been Morphy, but there hadn't been anybody else after that.
No.
So he was they regarded that as kind of one-shot wonder. So.
But Pillsbury, this was 1895, won it. In fact, it made news in the Fitchburg Daily Sentinel. This is 1895. Of course, the Sentinel came into being in 1838. It was publishing, daily. And in 1895, the September 3rd edition of the Sentinel, they published headlines. Pillsbury champion, young Boston chess player defeats old masters of Europe. I mean, this made national news, including our own local paper, the Fitchburg Daily Sentinel. Now, we have some photos of Pillsbury in some international tournaments. One of them actually was a year after Hastings, 1896 in Nuremberg. We have a picture where he competed in Nuremberg. This is Nuremberg, Germany, 1896. And Pillsbury is actually seated on the far right. He's the second head you'll see from the right. Yeah. I think he's actually the third person from the right, but I think it's the second head you see from the right. And the game we're going to present, his opponent, the game we're going to present is actually probably the tallest person standing in this. Probably in the middle. Is he actually located?
Pretty much in the center.
In the center of
with the big head of hair, bushy mustache, and
right. The person there, the player with the bushy mustache, tall, and his name is Jackson Whips Showalter.
Right.
So, and here he is.
Here
is Jackson Whips Showalter. By the way, what do you know about Jackson?
Well,
you actually did some research on Jackson.
When we were getting ready for this game, I started reading about him, and he turned out to be quite an interesting character.
Yes.
A little bit older than Pillsbury. He was born in 1860 in Kentucky.
Yes.
And came from a very prominent family. And because he learned chess from his father, and fairly soon he was beating everybody around. And so he took up correspondence chess because there weren't any other strong players in his immediate area. And he became a very strong player, known as a very strong player in correspondence chess, where players would write down a move on a postcard and mail it to their opponent and wait for the reply. And then somewhere around the age of 30, he decided to go to New York and pursue chess on a more active level. He'd already won some tournaments and so on, but New York was really the center of chess in the United States at the time. And so he started, and he played all the prominent players, and he had excellent records against all the top players. And in this tournament, this Nuremberg, and later on there's a picture from Vienna.
Yes, and we actually have a photo of the 1898 tournament in Vienna, Austria. And here, Pillsbury is seated. He is the third from the left, right there in the front.
And Showalter is up above his left shoulder.
So Showalter, again, right behind him.
Right. They were traveling together, as it turns out, at this time. They left from New York together and headed off to Europe on this tour. And they traveled together. Besides being opponents, they apparently were friends as well.
And Pillsbury had a lot of respect for Showalter.
Sure. In fact, when Pillsbury won that big victory at Hastings some years before, an interviewer asked him, were there any other Americans who could compete on the same level as the European players? And he right away just said Showalter could. And then a few years later came, and Showalter had a decent result. I don't think he won any major tournaments in Europe, but he had a decent result.
Okay.
And he had other things. He was also a baseball player. He played on a traveling team that played all through the Ohio River Valley, down the Mississippi, all the way to New Orleans, one of these traveling barnstorming teams. He was their pitcher, and he was apparently the first pitcher to use the curveball in Kentucky.
Oh, really?
He's known for this. Some people say he invented the curveball, but that's not true. That was already
But he used the curveball.
But he was one of the early proponents of the curveball. And he was a baseball fanatic all his life, in addition to chess.
And you told me his wife played chess.
And he taught his wife, Nellie, he taught his wife how to play, and she was reputed to be the best woman player at the time. A little hard to establish because there were no tournaments that involved women, no formal matches that we know of, that I know of anyway.
Right.
But she was reputed to be the strongest woman player of her time, and in fact, she beat Edward Lasker.
Emanuel
Lasker, right.
Who was the world champion. He was actually world champion.
He gave her odds of a knight. In other words, he took off one of his knights off the board.
Yes.
And she beat him twice with those odds.
She beat him twice.
Yeah.
You know, Bobby Fischer, years later, made the claim that he could actually spot any woman a night and win a game. But again, nowadays, the female players are so strong that no man can spot our strongest women players, a night and win. But back then, she was able to beat Lasker, world champion, by a handicap of a night.
So these two players that we're going to be talking about, Showalter and Pillsbury, they played more than 60 games between them, match games and tournament games and so on and so on.
The first match they played for the U.S. Championship.
Right.
So in 1897, their first match, Pillsbury had to come from behind. He won the match. It was a 21-game match. He won by 2 points. It was 11.5 to 9.5, and they played it in Brooklyn. The purse was, I think they paid for $2,000. That's a lot of money back then for playing for chess. Then a year later, they had a return match, and Pillsbury won more convincingly. He won by a score of 8-4, and it was played at the Postal Telegraph Building in New York City.
Right.
The game we're going to present to our viewers is the 12th and final game of that 1898 match. So why don't we start this game, and who has white in that?
Okay, Showalter in this case is white, Pillsbury is black.
Okay, so how did Showalter start the game here?
Okay, Showalter opened with the pawn on e2 to e4, which we've talked about a lot before. It puts a pawn in the center, controls two squares in the center. It opens up two important files, one for the white squared bishop and the other for the queen.
Okay.
Two diagonals, I should say.
All right. So Pillsbury, in response to e4, plays e5. The pawn on e7 goes e5. So he is also, it's a fight over the center. You know,
Right.
this is a classical opening, probably the most common way to open a chess game.
Right.
Is e4, e5.
Right.
All right, so it's now Showalter's second move.
Showalter moves. He takes a developing move. He takes his knight on g1, moves it to f3, develops a knight, and attacks the pawn on e5. Black's pawn. Black needs to do something about that.
Right, this is the first threat of the game.
Right.
All right. So what the Pillsbury did is a very logical reply, is to play knight c6. He plays the knight on b8, plays the c6. The knight now protects the pawn on e5 and prevents white from capturing that pawn. All right, so now it's Showalter's turn.
So from this position, we've been here often before. White is looking for some, he wants to develop his pieces. Well, wants to get his pieces out where he can play them.
Yes.
And looking at the white squared bishop, he's opened up that diagonal with the pawn move. We've seen white play the bishop to c4.
That's
often.
playable. Yes.
Showalter plays the bishop to b5, which we've also seen. It attacks the knight.
Yes.
And if white were to take the knight with the bishop, then that would leave the pawn undefended. So there's kind of a secondary attack there.
Okay. Now, all these chess openings have names. What is the name of this opening, playing the bishop b5?
Among English-speaking players, it's called the Ruy Lopez, which is named after a Catholic priest, apparently, who developed it. But
Yes.
elsewhere in the world, it's known as the Spanish game.
Okay. So it was named after the homeland of the Spanish priest,
Right.
Ruy Lopez. Yeah. And this goes back, he was a priest back in the 16th century.
Right.
And he spent a lot of time playing chess. He was not too
busy.
not too popular with his bishops,
Right.
and higher up. But he was the one that said, "This is the move to play against knight c6." In fact, he wrote a book. It was in 1561. He says that knight c6 is not the move to play because it
of that
allows
move.
bishop f5.
Right.
And again, he gets the credit, or the opening named after him.
Right.
Again, in this country, most players call it the Ruy Lopez, but most everybody else calls it the Spanish opening. All right, so now it's Pillsbury's turn, and and against this move here, bishop b5, we can actually, most popular now is putting the question to the bishop by playing a6. That is most commonly played to determine, to force white to make a decision. Are you going to take this knight on c6, or are you going to retreat?
Right.
Also playable, Steinitz, the world champion Steinitz, used to play d6.
Right.
He would continue there.
Solidifying, yeah.
There's also this f5, which is possible,
right.
known as the Schliemann defense. There's also bishop c5, which is the classical defense. There's all kinds of defenses. What Pillsbury played was a very good move, knight f6. So that was his third move, and this is known as the Berlin defense.
Right.
Because the German players back in the early 1800s were playing this. They were playing knight f6.
Right.
All right, so now it's Showalter's fourth move coming up.
Well, there are a number of things that white can do. White could castle. He's ready to castle, which has been done.
Right.
He could play something very quiet. He could play d3.
Protecting the pawn.
Protects
Again,
the pawn
this
because the pawn is attacked.
Yeah, the pawn attacked, but
Even this has been played queen to e2, though. It doesn't really look all
right.
that
Or even knight c3.
Knight c3 is another
possibility.
possibility.
Defending the pawn is possible, but it's not necessary.
because you can always regain it.
Okay, so what did Showalter play, though?
He played something that's not seen too often these days. He played the pawn on d2 to d4, attacking that pawn on e5.
All right, so now we have a double attack on this pawn. It's only defended once by the knight.
Right.
So what Pillsbury did, he captured. The E pawn, captures on d4. So he takes that pawn. All right, so now Showalter, in turn, does he take back that pawn?
Well, he could take it back. He could take it back with the knight, and knight takes knight, and then queen takes knight. That's possible. But he's also in no rush. There's nothing really that black can do to defend that pawn right away. So he can kind of let it sit there. What he chooses to do is to castle. He's going to get his king to safety and get his rook to the center of the board. He's going to develop his pieces.
All right. As rapidly as possible. That's the name of the game.
Right.
Rapid development of the pieces.
Right.
Okay. What Pillsbury did now is he now puts the question, the so-called question to the bishop. He plays a6, attacks the bishop, and tells white, what are you going to do? Are you going to take my knight, or are you going to retreat?
Well, he could take the knight,
yes,
and then recapture the pawn, and so on. That would be one set of moves. It's playable, I would think. So it wouldn't make any sense to come back this way, because that would negate any reason for coming out this way. So the other option is to retreat to a4. He brought the bishop out to take this diagonal, because it does aim at the king, and so he's going to keep that bishop on the diagonal. He retreats the bishop from b5 to a4.
Okay. All right, so Pillsbury now plays the bishop on f8. It's time to develop this piece. Now, he could have played the bishop to c5, protecting this pawn. Of course, it's attacked twice, so there's no way he's going to be able to hold on to this pawn.
Right.
He could play bishop, but he played bishop e7. That was his move. Bishop e7, because he's getting ready to castle.
Right.
All right, so now it's Showalter's seventh move coming up.
So he plays rook to e1, protecting. This pawn has been hanging for this whole time. So he centralizes his rook, and he protects the e4 pawn.
All right. All right, so Pillsbury now castles. Now that he's played his bishop to e7, he now castles on his seventh move. All right, so now Showalter's move.
Okay, Showalter. Now, Showalter's got a good solid position at this point, I would think, at least to my mind. And so he's going to mount an attack. If you look at Pillsbury's position, the pieces look like they might be a little bit cramped, and he's looking for a way to kind of push him back even farther. So he's going to take this e4 pawn and push that, threatening the knight on f6.
All right, so this forcing this knight to move.
Right.
All right. And this knight doesn't have to, well, it's limited as far as the squares it can go to. It could go to d5. The knight could go to d5. That's a possibility.
Right.
With the idea of redeploying over to b6 with maybe an attack on the bishop. The knight could go to g4, although that doesn't look so pleasant, because in response to that...
Because white could simply play h3, and now the knight definitely has no good square to go to.
Then the knight would be driven back here.
And you could trade that with the bishop on c1, takes that, it opens up the king
that
position.
Would weaken the castle position, which is not...
It would be a disaster.
Okay, so what he did with this after e5, instead of playing d5 or g4, he plays back to e8. Knight e8 is his move.
Okay, so now he's pushed back. Showalter has pushed back the knight.
Yes.
He's got two strong pieces in the center.
Right.
Now he's going to finish off this exchange. He's going to play knight take d4.
All right. So what Pillsbury did, he plays knight takes d4.
Right.
Knight takes d4
and the queen recaptures. So now he's got the queen out in a fairly strong place. The rook is centered. The bishop's on a good diagonal.
Okay.
Can go to another diagonal if it wants. He's got it.
Yes. All right. So Pillsbury now, he's got to do something about developing these pieces. This bishop here needs some scope. So what he plays is d5. That's his move, his 10th move.
Now, what's interesting about this point, at this point, this actually is, by a different move order, a number of modern games have reached this position, but by a different sequence of moves transposed to this. And so some of the more modern players have played this move, e takes d on d6 en passant, capturing. That's one way.
Okay, in passing. So he could take back he could take back with the bishop or the knight or even the pawn.
Right.
So that's one way. Taking it en passant, in passing, is a possibility. So
what Showalter did was
this is here, right?
Yeah, that's there. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And
so
what Showalter did was he played the bishop on b2 to b4.
And the reason he did that is because he has to stop this c5.
Right. He doesn't want to do that.
All right. So he plays b4 to stop Pillsbury from playing c5.
That would push the queen back. Give him the center.
All right. So what Pillsbury does is he reinforces the defense of this d pawn and plays c6.
Right.
The c6 now strengthens, it builds a wall. We've actually built a very strong wall here. All right, so now what does Showalter do?
Well, you look at his queen side, and the rook, knight, and bishop are not yet developed. He's developed his king side, he's got pieces in the center, but he's got to do something here.
All right.
He moves the bishop on c1 to b2, putting it on a very strong diagonal, aiming right towards the king and the queen and so on. So it's a...
All right, so now it's time. Pillsbury now redeploys the knight. The knight on e8 has no future here, but he plays at the c7. Knight c7 is his move, possibly with the idea of coming to e6, attacking the queen.
Right.
So what does Showalter do?
Well, he's going to play pawn to a3. He wants to, right now, before a3, the queen is the only piece defending the pawn. It was being attacked by black's bishop on e7. So he wants to free the queen to move, so he needs to defend the pawn first, so he plays a3 to defend that b4 pawn.
Okay, Pillsbury now plays a5. He now uses this pawn.
So now he
pawn.
attacks it.
He now has this a pawn now helping attack this pawn. Of course, it's defended by the a pawn and the queen, but he's going
to add to the defense. He's going to play pawn, this c pawn on c2 to c3 to give it this additional defense. You know?
All right.
But it's but it also blocks the diagonal.
Okay. All right. So Pillsbury being behind in development, you see, he has fewer pieces developed. He now can develop this bishop. This light squared bishop now can come out, and he plays bishop f5. So he plays it to a good square.
Right.
A good,
well, he can't play it to g4 because the queen will take it.
The queen would take it.
Doesn't do any good on e6 because actually it's a better square for the knight.
All right, so what does Showalter do against this?
He's going to come down. He's going to try to get some action down on the queen side. He's going to play the queen down to b6, which looks aggressive, but as it turns out,
he is
attacking
the b pawn.
Right.
And again, if he
and he's threatening to penetrate in.
Yes. So this pawn should not be allowed to be taken.
No.
So what Pillsbury does, he just plays queen c8 and protects the pawn, b pawn. All right.
Well, now Showalter needs to develop these two pieces: the rook on a1 and the knight on b1. He plays the knight to d2.
All right. All right, so what
to get that knight into play?
Yes, and it also connects the rooks, and so what Pillsbury did was play the knight to e6. He now improves his position by playing that knight here, and also, isn't he threatening to come in to f4 with that knight?
Right. That's what it turns out to be the key move in this. That he is threatening to come out to f4.
Right.
And it would appear that Showalter really didn't anticipate it because his next move looks like kind of an automatic move you do almost without thinking. He played the knight to d2 so that he can go to f3, which is exactly what he did. Protects that pawn a little bit, so gets the knight out to f3, which is a good spot, but he hadn't really been thinking the implications of what happens if that knight gets to f5.
So what he should have played was g3.
That would have saved a lot of later trouble. Yeah,
that would have actually kept the knight out of
going there.
All right. So now with the knight at f3, Pillsbury now can play knight f4, and this is
and he still doesn't see what's coming.
No,
because he plays a move that, again, he could have saved a lot of trouble. He plays the bishop to b3, which doesn't do anything from what I can see.
No, that's actually, it's a mystery to me.
Right. He could have come back to d1. That would have saved, even he would have saved a lot of trouble.
Yeah,
he couldn't go there.
Bishop d1 looks much better, you know.
Right. But he plays to b3. He clearly doesn't anticipate what's going to happen.
Well, now Pillsbury surprises him. This bishop, he should have anticipated what's coming, but he didn't. He overlooked. Knight takes g2. What's this all? Wait a minute. This knight has no protection. Right. Why is knight takes g2 playable here?
Well,
can't Showalter take that knight?
Well, if he takes it, it leads to checkmate.
Well, let's see the checkmate. If the king takes the knight,
right?
So we continue with the bishop here to h3 check.
Check. He's only got one or two spaces.
Right.
He can either go back straight or back to here.
Right. Can't come up because he
can't go up.
He can't go up because
that's instant checkmate from the queen.
Right. The queen would come to g4.
So if he comes back to the corner.
So in this, then the queen just comes to g4, threatens the
mate on there.
Right there.
And if he brings the rook over to threaten the queen takes the knight.
Queen takes the knight on f3, check. He blocks with the rook, and then the queen takes g2 mate.
Checkmate.
All right, checkmate. Okay, so that means with this knight, this is here, And where was this? This is here, and this is back here. All right, so this knight is poisoned.
Right,
Cannot be
can't
taken.
touch it, right.
All right, so on knight g2, but he's attacking the
But he's
rook.
attacking the rook,
So
so
he
he-
moves the rook over to, what? He moves that rook.
The rook goes, he plays the rook over to d1.
Right, so rook ed1 is his move. All right, so what Pillsbury does is he plays bishop e4. Right.
So now well, the knight is attacked. He has to
Right.
do something. He has.
Right, he is attacking.
He doesn't
but-
have a really good way. If he had played the bishop, if he had played the bishop back here, he wouldn't have.
And he still
this
can't
trouble.
take that knight
Right.
because of the queen
Right.
g4
so
check.
he comes back with the knight to d2, attacking the bishop.
Aha.
Hoping to take
Right,
some
you
of
hope
the
to
pressure
get rid
off.
of that, and
Right.
then all right. But he overlooks Pillsbury's surprising move. Instead of bringing this queen into play here, which you would think would be strong, this is the move that is actually he
Right.
overlooked. Rook a6 attacks the queen.
Right. The
All right,
queen-
now queen. Where can the queen
Well,
go?
the queen really only has one square to go to.
There's only one square. Queen d4. All right? So now, what Pillsbury does, he plays the knight on g2 to f4, and what is he threatening?
Well, he's threatening queen to g4,
Right?
and that'll lead to checkmate.
Yep.
So-
He checkmate, yeah.
So he
but also,
can-
he's also checking, there's also a
The
fork.
fork
There's
on the
also a
queen.
fork threatening to
Right,
win the queen.
queen, right.
So he's got all kinds
So
of threats.
he's going to come back. Now because the knight has moved, he can play the queen to e3,
Right? Well, now
threatening the knight.
All right. Pillsbury now is going to bring his strongest piece, the queen, and plays queen to g4 check. Now, why can't Showalter block with the queen and put it on g3? He can.
Well-
Is blocking with the queen a mistake?
Well, if he blocks with the queen,
Yes.
then
Do we have this knight?
we have this
Yes.
check here,
Check.
forking the queen.
And then the queen is lost.
Right.
So he can't block
And then
with the queen.
comes mate right after
yes,
that.
right, exactly. So the queen block would lose. So what he has to do on this check, he's got to
He's
move.
only got one square.
He's got to move the king.
Right.
He only has one square. King f1 is the only move he has. All right. So what Pillsbury does, he plays bishop d3 check. Okay. So wait a minute. Why can't can Showalter go to e1 with the king? What's
Well,
wrong with that?
If he goes to e1 with the king,
The game is over.
well, then he can check with the knight and forks the queen and wins the queen.
Well, actually, it's mate.
Oh, it's mate.
It's
right.
even
Yeah,
mate.
yeah,
It's even better.
right.
This is actually knight g2
Right.
is checkmate.
Right.
So he can't move the king to e1. So that, well, he has no choice then. On this check bishop d3, what he played in the game, and contemporary players would probably resign in this position. What Showalter played, he played queen takes d3.
Right.
All right. Now, Pillsbury did not take back the queen with the
No.
knight. Instead,
He came down,
He came
right.
down. Queen g2 check, forcing the king over there. And now came
Now he takes
knight d3
with check. He's
And-
going to win the bishop.
Yeah, in fact, after the king moves, he's going to win. He's going to win this.
Threatening
bishop.
this rook. And
Yeah. So this is where he called it quits. He
Right.
says, "I've had enough." So this was a 25-move game. This ended the match in 1898 against Jackson with Showalter. And again, these were two of the strongest players. Certainly, Pillsbury was actually stronger than Showalter.
Yeah, but they were the two strongest American players at the time.
Exactly. Now, interesting, we have a few minutes left, a few seconds maybe. 3 years ago, the Massachusetts Chess Association held a ceremony at the Laurel Hill Cemetery in Reading, Massachusetts, where the Pillsbury family plot is. Anyone going there prior to 2006 would find just an obelisk. It was an obelisk, just the name Pillsbury and nothing. No marker. No one know who was actually buried here.
Right.
What the Chess Association did was put a plaque commemorating that this was the American chess champion, and he was the hero of Hastings, won 1895. So we have done justice to the Pillsbury name.
So despite his accomplishments, he died and was buried in obscurity. Then.
Right, exactly. Well, anyways, chess fans, I hope you enjoyed the game that Marty and I presented to you today, and we'll see you next time for another edition of Chess Chat. Stay tuned.